Hey again, Sprinkles here. So today I have something brand new. It's a tutorial. Uh, Recently I just did a picture called the Rogue 9, and I looked all over the internet for an Embers tutorial just because I wanted it in the picture, and I didn't find one at all. So supply and demand, I decided to make a tutorial just because. Now, this isn't probably the best way to do it, but this is how I did it, and I liked it enough that I figured I'd share it. So we're just gonna hop into it. Why not? And we're gonna work on currently picking a brush that you like. Now, I picked one with tons of little doodads. This one, it's one of my favorite standard brushes that's highlighted. You could use any brush that you want. Like there's this one here with a bunch of little weird dots going on. You can even choose any of these other ones down here. But I like the one that I picked originally because it's one of my favorite brushes. It has a lot of space in it, so it's really versatile. So if you select any random brush that you're ready for and you go straight into the painting, you're going to end up with this nonsense. You're going to have identical blobs everywhere that look like this. And you don't need identical blobs everywhere because nature isn't identical in any way. It has variety. And so the best way to correct this is to turn on the track direction. And it gives you some sort of variety with your identical blobs. Like, it's not going to change the brush shape, but it's going to rotate the brush shape as you paint with it. So that way, everything's not so standard. So, even though, again, they look the same, they'll move differently. And the more you move it, the more variety you'll get. Like this. So what you're going to do now is you're going to set your brush size to whatever size you want. Larger embers will be closer toward the screen. So I have a black background currently, but you can use any dark background that you want. That'll show the ember awesomely. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a transparent layer on top of our base black layer. We're going to add 3 transparent layers on top of our black background. So now you're going to paint your embers however you want with the brush. Move it around a little bit so that way the track rotation can change and vary about. So you're going to add however many you want wherever you want. But remember, embers fade going toward the top. So be sure to only layer a few embers at the top and keep the majority at the bottom where our fire source is going to be. And if your fire source is coming from the left and then blowing right, like there's a sharp wind, then you're going to put all your embers closer toward the left and few toward, closer embers to the left and few toward the right. And once you're happy with how your ember placement is, you're going to take any round brush and erase any clusters of embers that you don't like. Or you can feel free to do that. Some embers that you feel are too lumped together, you can happy with what you erased, remember to keep some large ember clusters at the bottom. And don't erase all of the super tiny and half-faded embers. Like, embers aren't uniform, so some will be brighter than the others as they're probably cooler than the others. Honestly, that's just how nature works. That's how fire works. The wind and the cool down hit certain areas first rather than all of them at once. So erase what you want, but don't erase all of them, just so that way you have some variety. Like these little itty bitty dots in there, I didn't erase all of those. Like, I left them because it gave some variety. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the embers layer 2 more times. We're going to duplicate one for the orange and one for the yellow. And our first ember layer will be for the red. And after you duplicate all of them, you should have 3 layers of identical embers. One for red, orange, and yellow. And then you can change the name to match. Red embers, orange embers, yellow embers. But I knew what I was doing, so I kind of had an idea of what I was doing, so I didn't label them. So if it looks a little confusing, just remember that you yourself can label them. It doesn't matter. Whatever helps you along, and make sure that you're not painting on the wrong layer. Like so many mistakes that I've done personally because I'm an idiot. But everyone does it, so I should stop beating myself up about it. Anyways, so we're going to hide all the other layers and just work on the red layer now. We're going to go to the red layer and we're going to blur it out. We're going to use the Gaussian blur, and this one will be the fuzziest layer. Just don't blow it out too much, otherwise it'll give you the faded effect that you want, but we're going to add that later. We still want some bit of piping hot red in there, so we're not going to blur it out too much. I break the link for the Gaussian blur just because we don't want it to be identical in the X and Y axis. We just want it to go supreme in one direction and not so supreme in the other direction. But if you want them to be identical, you're fine with that. You can do whichever one you want. But personally, I just did higher on the X axis and a little bit on the Y axis. We're going to add our heat glow in the background a little later, so that's why I'm saying not to blow it out too much with the Gaussian blur now, because then it'll just be too blurry and too hot and fiery. And we want to be able to layer this over whatever picture that we're putting the embers over, and you don't want the embers to just take up the whole picture, so you don't want to add so much red. So now we're going to colorize it. The color I went for was F61C1C. It was a nice red. It was a nice, vibrant, fiery red. But GIMP, for some reason, required me to make it darker. I had to do this for all of the colorful layers, for the orange layer and the yellow layer. But your program may not require you to make them darker in order for it to be visible. So you don't have to follow this step. This is just for me. But if your program doesn't colorize the picture immediately like mine did, then hopefully my extra steps here can help you out. So I lowered the lightness to help the red come out, but it was all basically what I had worked the color to was basically the red F61C1C. So that's the color that we're going to go for. There also may be something going on in my program that I'll have to fix on my off time, because I don't know, I always screw around with the program trying to see what I can fix, and then I always mess something up for myself. So I probably did just that. So you can ignore it again, like I said, but if it helps you correct a problem that you have with your own program, then by all means, follow it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to erase a bit of it. I don't need the red to be super vibrant. Well, I do. That's why it's as big as it is, or as bright as it is. but we're just going to erase it just a little bit. So I set my opacity down to 30% and erased some. Now, it didn't erase a bunch. That's what I liked about the eraser here, but it erased just enough so that way the red blurred a bit more. And now we're going to move on to the next layer. We're going to show the orange layer, which is directly above the red layer. And we're going to do the exact same thing to the orange layer that we did to the red layer. And basically we're going to do it for the yellow layer too. Why not? So when we work on the orange and yellow layer, we're going to blur a little less for each layer. So the orange is blurred less than the red, and the yellow is less than the orange. I set the color to F6H21C, and I had to darken it. And then for yellow, I set the color to F6F11C, and I had to darken that too. They all came out the colors that they originally were, but they just had to become a little bit darker so that we understood that I was colorizing something. And as far as the orange and yellow layers go, we're not going to lightly erase it like we did with the red. We just wanted the red to blur out a bit. The orange and yellow we want nice and loud and popping. So we're just going to leave those alone. And after we're done with whatever color we're doing, we're going to move on to the highlights. Once you're happy with your yellow and orange, we're going to create a brand new layer, and we're going to name it for the highlights that we're about to do. the previous yellow layer, we're going to use the fuzzy select tool and select any blank space that isn't an ember. Like, don't click on an ember, just click on anywhere that's not an ember. And it'll select only a few of the embers because it's designed to select a certain amount of something. And if you have it set to where I have it, which is about halfway for the threshold, it won't select everything. If you have it further up, it'll select everything. If you have it further down, it'll select less than that. And you're only going to want it to select a few things. And if you want to remove certain items, like certain glowy embers, you can. You can use, it's called a lasso tool on GIMP. Whatever program you're using, it probably has a different name, or it's called lasso everywhere. But you're going to use your lasso tool and remove whatever embers you don't want. Like, or whatever, yeah, whatever highlights you don't want to add to certain embers. Like, not like that, but if you don't like the cluster of embers right there, then you can remove one, or you can remove a bunch and only have a couple of them piping hot. But if you like how it looks, then you can just continue on with yourself. Now feel free to remove or add any additional ember spots you like. But remember, not all of the embers should be white hot in the middle. Like, not all of them. Like, the air touched something eventually, so they all shouldn't be white in the middle. So remove what you want or add what you want, but don't add all of them, because then it's an unrealistic effect. And now what you're going to do, after you select what embers will be the hottest, go back to your blank highlight layer and select a standard round brush. Lower the opacity, I did halfway, and invert your selection and paint over the embers. Invert your selection, Shiva. I always forget that. I always forget to invert it, and then I'm always painting everything behind it. Whatever, I figured it out. And you're just gonna drag the brush over everything really quick. We're not gonna double back over anything really. If you want to, then you can feel free and go ahead, but I just moved on. And now we see here that everything is, or not everything, but certain embers are now super white in the middle. And so that means they're the hottest embers. And now that we're done with that, if you're happy with it, we're gonna go and focus on the layer behind the embers. So what we're going to do is create a new layer for the heat vapors and select the color red again that we had for the embers first layer. We're going to title it heat vapors or whatever you want to call it, just so you know what layer you're on. And then we're going to take we're going to select our red again and use a fuzzier round brush than we did for everything else. And drop the opacity quite a bit. Like, I dropped my opacity around 98%, so there was only like 2% up there. So we're going to drop it a lot. We have to drop it a lot. It's super bright otherwise. And you'll see here, like, I only dropped it to 25 at first, and it's just, nope. It just didn't work. So I dropped it much more than that, about 2%. See, even 6 was too bright. So I dropped it about 98%, and it worked perfectly. It was just the right color I needed. But we're gonna make our brush bigger, so that way it has a wider range and a more faded effect. So after you're happy with whatever heat vapors that you like for your picture, we're going to move on and we're going to blur the background. Now yours might not have done the circular thing that mine did. I ended up correcting that yesterday. I drew this like 3 days ago. So I ended up correcting that and blurring it out. So you don't have to if yours didn't tactile like mine did. But if it did, then feel free to blur it out and erase wherever you feel like it's too bright. Like I said, remember that your heat source is at the bottom, so it's going to be hotter down here and then more faded at the top. So wherever you feel like it's too hot, go ahead and erase it. I didn't erase very much, and then I blurred what was left. But this is the part where you dawdle around and correct what you want or what you don't want. If you're done and you're happy with it, then way to go. Congratulations. You created some embers that I feel look pretty alright. So that's the end of this one. I don't have anything else to say. Thanks for watching. And if you liked it, by all means, continue to do so. If there's anything that you feel like should be changed or too many steps have been added, then go ahead and erase some steps or add some steps. It's all up to you. This is just a nice little guideline to get you to where you need to go. All right? Okay. Thanks again for watching. Bye.